What's up, Jim?
Doing well. How you doing, Jared?
Doing good, man. Another
Hey,
Sunday recording.
another Sunday recording. I think this might be a pattern now. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's kind of like a
we already
pattern.
got our first little dusting of some snow.
Yeah, a little snow. We've entered the holiday season, so
Yep, it's nice.
it's a good thing. Good thing. And it's cold as heck out there here in Kansas.
Yes, it is. Yeah, the
Looking
outdoor
kind of
ruck's going to be a lot more covered up now.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, I'm gonna have to bundle up for tomorrow morning. I'll say that. Yeah. Cool. So we're beginning a series today, right?
Yep.
We'll get into all that in a moment. But first, Jared, what are you reading this week?
So for class, we did the Suesoria from Seneca, and then I actually picked up a book I've had on my shelf for a little while, but I just haven't really had a chance to dive into it. It's called Fighting for Life. The subtitle is Context, Sexuality, and Consciousness. It's by Walter Ong.
Okay.
And it's really interesting that what we're talking about today in regard to like societal character and how that forces certain characteristics in how society behaves. And his big thing is how contest does it. So whether it's sports or war or just, two dudes trying to get the same girl,
Huh.
all that kind of male intuition and combativeness and what that did for society and what it continues to do, whether for good or ill.
For good or ill. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. So, and what's that guy's background? Is he a
I
sociologist
don't
or
remember. I actually have it right here.
not that it matters, but
Yeah, he is the professor of humanities at Emeritus University,
okay. Interesting.
and he's a professor of humanities and psychiatry at St. Louis University.
Ah, okay. Very cool. An interesting cat working in
Yeah.
psychiatry and humanities. My kind of guy. Yeah.
How
So
about you?
go ahead.
How about you?
Me. Okay. So I am reading and kind of getting ready for class next semester. Once again, I'm teaching Hegel's phenomenology.
Nice.
And so last week I read Heidegger's commentary. This week I'm rereading. I've read this before many years ago. Kojève's An Introduction to the Reading of Hegel, which is this infamous love it or hate it
Okay.
reading. Yeah. And I had a long time ago resolved to hate it, and now rereading it though, like I don't. I wish it were easier to dismiss Kojève than it is. So.
Yeah, it's funny how books can do that.
That it yeah, it's 'cause and especially when you give somebody 300 pages of your attention,
Yes.
you know, th don't think you won't be persuaded at some level, right?
Exactly.
And I continue to make my way through with great joy, Wendy Painting's, Aberration in the Heartland of the Real, which is
Nice.
her, sort of sociological take on the Tim McVeigh phenomenon, and, we are definitely gonna spend an episode talking about that at some point, so
Nice. We should.
continue with that. Mhm. Yep. So, all right, but now this week, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this week we are doing Eric Fromm, Escape from Freedom. Okay. Fromm is an author you've never read, right?
No, this is my first read of his. Yep.
Read, yeah. I have never read this book by Fromm, Escape from Freedom. I've read his book, The Sane Society, a while back, before I had really studied analysis. So
Okay.
I'm kind of want to go back and look at that one. And I have read his book on psychoanalysis and religion, right? To,
Okay.
to great to great reward, right? But I've never read this one, and man, I have been very taken by this book so far. I don't know
Yes.
about you, Jared, but yeah, yeah. In fact, as I read it, I told you this the other day, is like, man, this is a book as if written for Jared, right? In many ways, right?
Totally.
So, uh, and we're gonna probably do what probably get this in 2 episodes.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
A
So
lot.
today we're doing chapters. What do? We did chapters, the forwards, and then we did chapters 1 to 3, which
Mhm.
roughly half of the text, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so it is Escape from Freedom. So a little bit thing about Eric Fromm is one of the biggest uh, names in psychoanalysis in the 20th century. Now I'm forgetting, I can't remember if he directly studied with Freud or not. I think
Okay.
he did. There was some contact there. But as we'll talk about today, he departs from Freud significantly, right?
Yes.
In some of the stuff he does. He was involved with the Frankfurt School, right? People like Marcuse and Adorno and Horkheimer, but also kind of eventually, departs from them a bit.
Hmm.
Has influence on people like Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, and just an important author in his own right. Born in 1900, died in 1980, I think is what I found when I looked it up. And has a really extensive line of books, right? And the interesting thing about Fromm, he's a good gateway drug to this kind of inquiry because it reads it's a very easy read, right?
Yeah, stylistically,
Deceptively
he's a
so.
great writer.
Yeah, he's a great writer. Yeah, deceptively so. Okay.
Yes,
Because it's far more sophisticated than it
yes.
comes because it's so easy to read. Yeah. And so this particular text, okay, so Eric Fromm is a Jew uh, who fled Europe in during in the 1930s, right? He's writing this book in 1941. I think he's in the States by this point. It's because it was written in English. Um, and it is basically his psychoanalysis of Nazism,
Hmm.
right? And it's interesting. He's giving a sort of psychological, historical account of why Nazism is sort of an inevitable result of modernity. Okay.
Yes, yes,
Without wanting to take modernity back. It's like there's an inherent risk in what happened in the coming of the modern age of something like Nazism or fascism or authoritarianism in general, right?
hmm,
And it seems like what we're going to see here from that where you have legitimate human liberation, there will always be a risk of what he calls an escape from freedom, right? Right.
yes,
That freedom can be too much, and so where freedom happens, there will always be its dialectical other, which is a kind of authoritarian backlash against it, right?
yes,
And so the book, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do it, is it seems like it's something like this perennial warning, right? Wherever you have situations of radical liberation, radical deterritorialization, there will be an inevitable tendency to try to get out of it by submitting to authority, right? In
yes.
very unconstructive ways, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because at one point he kind of makes this distinction, and this maybe would be a good place to start on kind of what he's talking about here. Is that the idea of freedom from that was fought for so many centuries from certain authorities, from certain infrastructures, but we never achieved freedom to fully. And by that, he means to like, he doesn't use the term virtue, but I kind of read it that way of like to be a good person pretty much and to like set up good
Yeah,
institutions for people to thrive in good communities. We kind of like, we short circuited ourselves because we got freedom from a lot of those authorities, but then because of that, it created an anxiety that we now are kind of on our own, that we now are tempted towards authoritarianism and somebody just have somebody tell me what I'm supposed to do.
yeah, yeah. So let me. Here's a great passage where he hints at this because in the section that we read, he never hauls off and really tells you, right? Like it's going to
Hmm.
come in the second half of the book. But in the foreword, and I think this is the foreword to the first edition, you get them both in this. So I'm on page 10, page Roman numeral 10, about midway through the page. Fromm says, "It is the thesis of this book that modern man, freed from the bonds of pre-individualistic society, which simultaneously gave him security and limited him, has not gained freedom in the positive sense of the realization of his individual self, that is, the expression of his intellectual, emotional, and sensuous potentialities. Freedom, though it has brought him independence and rationality, has made him isolated and thereby anxious and powerless. This isolation is unbearable, and the alternatives he is confronted with are either to escape from the burden of freedom into new dependencies and submission, or to advance to the full realization of positive freedom, which is based upon the uniqueness and individuality of man." End quote. Whoa. Okay. Um, so it seems like what he's saying is, yeah, you're right that there's two senses of freedom. There's negative freedom and there's positive freedom, a freedom of denial and a freedom of affirmation, both of which I think it's important here for this text to see that he's saying both of these are immensely important to the coming of the individual, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, and so on the one hand, he's saying freedom initially arrives on the scene as a modern phenomenon, which what he'll later call our breaking from primary ties.
Hmm.
Okay, and he draws this analogy with childhood. So
Yeah.
like the child is thrown into the scene. The child inherits, is thrown into a social environment. And it absolutely needs that, because without that social environment, the world is dark and scary and isolating and
Yep.
intimidating, et cetera, et cetera. And for the child, like physically threatening, all of this. Okay. So the child has these primary ties, but at some point, the kid has to grow up and break those primary ties. Like, dad, I'm not going to do what you tell me, right? Like, I'm going to go my own way, right? But then the result of that is going to be isolation and anxiety. Okay. And for Fromm, and so he, and the analogy he's drawing with as in, what is it? Um, Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, right? And so, like,
Mhm.
saying, like, as in the individual, so in the species of humans. So that humanity had an infantile stage. Think Kant, right? It has thrown off that infantile stage, thereby asserted a freedom from its primary ties, things like the church, things like, just given cultural institutions that are unquestioned. It's thrown those off, and now it's in a situation of radical isolation, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And the child will have a tendency to just go out and find some other authority that he can submit himself to, right? Something else it can throw itself into that will decide for it. Likewise, humanity is going to be looking for authorities now
Mhm.
to decide for it, right? And that's the attempt, that's the temptation to escape from freedom, which will always be there. The other direction is to take responsibility, right?
Yes.
For yourself or society as a whole, to take responsibility for itself. And I think there we're going to see he has something in mind like democracy. And and it's interesting what Fromm means by positive freedom. He says a little later is the availability of meaningful work, right? That lets
Mhm.
us decide for ourselves our relationship to nature, right? And to shape nature, and a kind of freely chosen like human relationship,
Yes.
right? You see that? So it's interesting. He does say that, like, there's a certain need we have to work on nature in a meaningful way, and there's a certain kind of human relationship that we need, an affirmative human relationship, and it's to take responsibility in choosing those for ourselves that he sees as positive freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting too because that's very early on in the work as he's explaining that this is where he departs from Freud because he praises Freud for saying that he found the unconscious, he found certain anxieties and desires that we have that drive us towards certain ends. But what he kind of didn't understand or didn't take into account was that, or he kind of points out Freud had this like bourgeois morality as he was growing up. And so he pointed towards like, well, the Victorian age, the kind of sexual mores that raised him, he sees it through that lens
Right.
versus what Fromm is saying is that like, no, the anxieties of the modern man is because we are isolated and those
Right.
anxieties are driving us. And so it's kind of what he's saying, at least the way I would explain it, maybe in a different way, is like how history evolves. It affects man's psychology, and that
Yes.
then creates new anxieties that create new drives. So while Freud is right, yes, but the modern man is so isolated and so anxious because we've given away our escaped from these
Yeah.
institutional authorities.
One of the things that fascinated me about this book, and this is exactly what you're saying, Jared, is how it's sort of a very accessible version of a big part of the argument in Deleuze and Guattari's almost impenetrable anti-Oedipus, right?
That's really interesting.
Which is their great attack on Freud. Okay, and one of the sources of their attack on Freud is of many sources, but one of the sources they really draw on are it's when they're writing very recently a set of notebooks from Marx, just Grundrisse, the notebooks were discovered and translated, and they're reading that, and it's very clear in the Grundrisse that like Marx, the way he puts it in the introduction to Grundrisse, is like desire is itself produced by the economic social situation. Okay,
Yes.
okay, and so, and you can think of it like what is Freud's psychoanalysis? It's a theory of desire and the origin of desire,
Hmm.
and it develops into the Oedipus complex. Okay, and anti-Oedipus, the book is basically to say is like what Freud has done is he has mistaken uh, the situation of oppression of 19th century, early 20th century Austria with human nature, right?
Yes.
And what that is that is a product of a certain mode of production, a certain set of human economic social relations, right? And it's not an ultimate feature of humanity as such, right? And so, like, maybe the Oedipus complex on the losing guitars, and I think Fromm's view, right, was indeed a thing at that time and place under those social conditions, but that doesn't mean it is like a it is the absolute of human nature. Okay,
Hmm. Hmm.
and what Fromm goes on in if you, Fromm is influenced by two people, Marx and Freud. Okay, I think we're going to eventually do his book on those two figures, right?
Mm, yeah, absolutely.
And he ultimately wants to say Freud, like Marx got something right at Freud's expense in that, in this idea that there is no absolutely settled human nature. And I have to be careful with that, because like Fromm does say that there are biological facts, right? Like humans need vitamin C, man, right? And if they don't get vitamin C, like things will go sideways, right? And he also says humans need love and acceptance.
Hmm.
Right? These are absolute human needs. Okay, and so there's a human nature in that basic sense, but like how that works out, how we get our vitamin C, like do we grow the oranges? Do we just pick them from the wild? Do we make it in a lab? Right? That is dependent on the social economic situation. And Fromm says how we get our love and affirmation is going to be dependent on the social and economic situation. Do you see that? And so I think he's saying that Freud is too blunt an instrument, right?
Mm, yeah.
That he's mistaken the human condition for one condition that humans have been put under in a certain very oppressive circumstance,
Yes.
right? And I think it's important for Fromm too, because then there's a kind of possibility of liberation from something like the Oedipus complex, right?
Hmm.
If we can change conditions, right?
Right.
So, like, I mean, our human practice has become really important in a Hegelian Marxist sort of way. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting too because he gives an example of like even just a cultural institution of the medieval ages, such as like you had your peasants, you had your royalty, you
yeah,
had very clear positions in life that you really couldn't rise above, and compare that to now, and the jealousies that arise, the anxieties that arise because you don't know your place, and you actually get to build it yourself. That's a
yeah,
good thing in one sense because
yeah,
we've escaped from the kind of chains of being forced into a specific social condition,
yes,
but on the other side of that, though, sometimes it freaking sucks being in capitalism and having to climb the ladder and do all that stuff.
yeah, and yeah, and once again, like to go with the losing Atari, and this is something that they take from a number of sources, but one of them is definitely Marx Grundrisse. So, and one of them is simply the Communist Manifesto, where they say, look, capitalism is this incredible asset that just dissolves things, right?
Hmm.
It comes in, it dissolves, it breaks up, it deterritorializes, to use their phrase. And so in those moments of deterritorialization, there's this dual possibility, right? For liberation and increased oppression, right?
Yes.
And I think now the way Fromm it says something similar is like anytime you have this breakup of primary ties, right? Like the social economic situation has changed so that what were our primary ties has been obliterated. Okay. And probably the most stark case of that happening really is in the early modern period, right?
Hmm.
Okay, with the rise of capitalism, where suddenly the whole social economic system is just completely thrown, like a wrench is thrown in that thing. Things are changed massively in a hurry. So now the primary ties that humans have like depended on, and you have a scientific revolution, you have political revolutions all going in there. All the certainties are thrown out, right? So now, and I think this is for Fromm, the constant dialectical tension. On the one hand, where there's liberation, right? The breaking of primary ties, and then there now the availability for us to think for ourselves what positively freedom will be. There will always also come an equally forceful possibility of submission to some kind of arbitrary authority to
Hmm.
solve the problem,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You see that? And I think so. What he's counseling here is a kind of wariness, right?
Yes.
Like always be on the lookout, right? Beware of liberation. Not that
Yes.
I mean, he's very for liberation, but beware of it, because for every case of liberation, right, where there's a proposal of a new affirmative freedom, there's likewise a temptation to avoid the work of that, right, and to submit yourself onto some kind of authority.
Yes. And it
Right.
doesn't have to be even a concrete institution. It can be something like consumerism, right? Like it can
Yeah.
be something that just kind of helps you make decisions in your own mind and what you value,
Yeah.
versus what you personally think through and value yourself. Come by this thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
And,
Definitely. I
and
mean,
you'll
like,
have the community that comes with it, right?
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, like, think of it. Like, what does consumerism do? It lets brands decide for me, like, what my life is going to be. Right. I mean, like, I mean at that, like, that really, like, grandiose level, like, because now you're, like, living your life in pursuit of the brand. Right.
Mhm.
And that, like, the brand is just an absolutely arbitrary authority.
Yes.
Right. There's nothing to recommend it over anything else on any rational grounds whatsoever. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like you could look at consumerism is a kind of authoritarian reterritorialization. Right.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and you can see where Fromm is pointing in 1930s German speaking world where he's coming from is you have, modernity is like really hitting hard in the German speaking world, right? Like all the old certainties have been like completely undermined, right? And what do you have? Like people are happy to throw themselves into an authoritarian fascist structure that will decide their lives for them, right? Right. Um, and I think, and it's interesting. Like, so Fromm writes the second forward to this book 25 years after its publication, and so he's writing this like 1966 in the States. He's like, yeah, it still seems to be a problem.
Yeah. It ain't over.
Right.
It ain't
Yeah,
over.
yeah, right. And this is, like in a lot, like some of the critics of the counter, some of the more interesting critics of the counterculture in the 1960s, like Lacan, who after the 68 attempted revolutions and things says, look, man, all you're just going to throw yourself onto another authority. Like that's
Hmm.
all you've done. Like you've just smashed things, and now you're going to throw yourself onto another authority because you have no positive vision, right?
Yes.
Okay. This of course like triggers Deleuze Guattari, right? But so there's interesting debate there, right? But you see the point is that um, wherever we find ourselves dealing with the anxiety of having to decide for ourselves, there's going to be a temptation to dodge it, right?
Yes.
And let something decide for us. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting too, and he goes a little bit into this, but something I was kind of reading through his lens also is that the new authorities tend to appeal to those anxieties in order to take authority, right? So
Right.
whether it's the Nazis pointing out, some kind of harm being done to the German people, or if it's brands saying, "Oh, you're going to miss out," or "Oh, you don't want to be
Yeah.
happy," "Oh, you don't
Yeah.
want to be part of the bigger community."
Yeah.
They all point to those things like, oh, you are free, but let me point out the anxieties that you have so that I can help you, or
Yeah.
save you from those anxieties.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think we're going to see as the book unfolds, right, is like the figure of the leader, right? Right. The figure of this person who can decide for you, whether it's like the star, like the pop star endorsing the brand, or it's the the political figure, right? Um, whichever it is, what you're doing is you are letting someone decide for you,
Hmm.
right? What my life is to look like, right? Which is a relief, right? In Fromm's view, right?
Yes.
Um, but then it just takes us back to where we started. Like we began in a kind of unthinking oppression with these primary ties, right? And we've liberated, we've had anxiety, and we've gone back, right?
Hmm.
Doesn't get us anywhere. I think like what Fromm is saying is like we have to discipline ourselves to not take that temptation so we can actually make progress.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. All right. So the kind of and like that, I mean that's and he gives you that sort of 30,000 foot look at the argument of the book early on. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. Um and so what he then does is we get a historical narrative, right? He wants to tell you the history of modernity, right? In a way that like affirms the theory, right?
Hmm.
Okay, the theory is, where you have liberation, there will always be authoritarian temptation to avoid the responsibility for liberation, right? Okay. And he's going to tell us a story, right? And it's funny, like this kind of narrative, it's almost become like cliche or hackneyed now, right? I mean, there was that real trend of this kind of thing that went on in like the 90s and the 2000s of like
Hmm.
telling the narrative modernity, and and like who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. I wonder if this is one of our first instances of that, right?
Oh, could be. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. It's very much a narrative of the rise of capitalism, right?
Hmm.
Okay, you get that. Like he starts out, he talks about like Renaissance Italy, and like nascent capitalism there. And then he like takes it north into the Low Countries, like doing the full Max Weber thing, right?
Yeah.
And he talks about though, like what happens is so the middle classes, um, on the one hand, so you have the feudal order, right? Um, and what happens now is suddenly you have these middle classes with the rise of capitalism that have some money for the first time. Okay. But their situation is utterly insecure, right?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, so you have you still have like the very, very well established landed aristocracy. Okay.
Hmm.
They're going to be okay. Right. Okay. They still have kind of reigns of power. And then you have the former serfs. Okay. Who are not going to be okay, but they're going to be co-opted into the increasingly like industrialized system, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
there's like precarious middle class. I think this will be important later for where he talks about fascism, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so you have though this like newly like very liberated middle class of bourgeois merchants, right? And now what do they do with that? Okay,
Yes.
you see
Yeah,
that,
because at the time there's still the cultural need for titles and the like,
right?
even laws that you can't pass down your money unless you do have a title, different
Right.
things like that, right?
Right. And so they're in the, like, so think of it like they have broken with the primary ties of medieval Christendom. Okay. They don't
Hmm.
fit in that anymore. Okay. So they're liberated, but they're isolated, alone, and very, very anxious. Right. And immediately what happens is there's just like vicious competition. Right.
Hmm.
And he talks about like the rise of a competition as a trope in this era. Okay. Now, right kind of parallel, like right ahead of that, there's some theological innovations, the Reformation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And um, so like and keep in mind, Fromm is Jewish, right? So he doesn't have a dog in this race. Like he's not trying to vindicate like one type of Christianity for another, okay? But it's interesting. He wants to draw like a straight line from Luther to modern authoritarianism, right? Like it's like he's gonna hang it on Luther, right? I mean, not that Luther tried to do it or something like that, but like Luther embodies what goes on here. Okay? Because what
Yes.
happens is Luther is all for busting up those primary ties, right? Like he doesn't want the inheritance of medieval Christendom anymore, right?
Hmm.
On Fromm's narrative. Okay. All right. And so this, like, you can think of it like this kind of fits the bourgeois, the new middle class in many, many ways, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And Luther, as Fromm points out, kind of wants the little rabble to stay in line. He wants social
Hmm.
order. Okay. So they like this. Okay. But what does he do? He produces a theology of absolute submission, right?
Yes.
Like, like, like you are absolutely worthless, absolutely positively worthless, unable to do anything in your own salvation. Your works don't matter, etc., etc. But all you can do is to submit to the most absolute authority possible, God, right?
Hmm.
As expressed in the scripture, unquestioningly. Okay. And like, so what Fromm is seeing here is like the absolute like wrong way to do it. Right. You know what I mean? Like you've got liberation. Yeah. Fromm likes that, coupled with complete submission to authority.
Yes.
Right. Ergo, modern authoritarianism is born right there.
Yes. I mean, literally saying, your will doesn't matter. The only will that matters is God's. So, like,
Right.
literally taking away your will.
Right. And then like what he's saying is that like then it's a small step from that theological outlook to a sort of attitude towards civil authority, to political authority, et cetera, right? So what he's saying is like built into like the flip side of modern liberation is authoritarianism. It's like it's
Hmm.
this ironic dialectic between the two, right? And you see it in like one of the absolute archetypical like people of modernity in Luther, and he's going to say Calvin too,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Right. Because once you say there's no primary ties, like there's like no earthly institutions can do anything for you, then all you have is complete submission to God. And now you have a theology of submission,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
And a theology of revolution, to be honest, because I think that, if you now don't like, even the king's will may not matter anymore, right?
Right.
Because it's only God's will. And I thought Calvin was interesting because he brings up predestination as this overarching, anxious driving, kind of subtext of the entire theology. And it
Yeah.
creates what we now know as like the Protestant work ethic. That
Right.
like you have to work so hard to make sure you're one of those predestined because
Right.
it's not up to you ultimately. You're born into it. So you're kind of run by a tyrant that already decided your end as an infant.
Right.
You know?
And all you can do now is, I think he uses the word frenetically work.
Yes. Yes.
All you can do, right? Right. Is frenetic work. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. This was like, for me, one of the most powerful passages in this, in the text so far. I'm on page 77. Okay. Over to 78. So this is where he's still working on Luther. All right. Um, Fromm says at the beginning of the first, like 4 lines into that first paragraph that begins in 77, Fromm says, yes, psychologically, this change from doubt to certainty, far from being contradictory, has a causal relation. Okay, let me stop right there. So what he's saying is, like, modernity finds itself in a kind of doubt, right? And think of it
Hmm.
like Descartes begins modern philosophy with, like, with doubt, right?
Hmm.
Because following Copernicus, following like all these changes, like we're like, what the heck else are we wrong about, right?
Yes.
So I think what Fromm means here is a kind of epistemic doubt, but he also means this deeper existential doubt, like what can we rely on to show us how to live, right? Like we have no script now, right? We have no user's manual on the human anymore, right?
Hmm.
Okay. He continues on. We must remember what has been said about the nature of this doubt. It was not the rational doubt which is rooted in the freedom of thinking and which dares to question established views. It was the irrational doubt that springs from the isolation and the powerlessness of an individual whose attitude towards the world is one of anxiety and hatred. The irrational doubt can never be cured by rational answers. It can only disappear if the individual becomes an integral part of a meaningful world. If this does not happen, as it did not happen with Luther and the middle class, which he represented, the doubt can only be silenced, driven underground, so to speak. And this can be done by some formula which promises absolute certainty. The compulsive quest for certainty, as we find with Luther, is not the expression of genuine faith, but is rooted in the need to conquer the unbearable doubt. Luther's solution is one which we find present in many individuals today who do not think in theological terms, namely to find certainty by elimination of the isolated individual self, by becoming an instrument in the hands of an overwhelmingly strong power outside of the individual. End quote. Okay. So I think what Fromm is saying there is that, like, this modern version of faith, which is completely secularized too, is when in doubt, join something,
Hmm.
right? Like join something that will let you just be an unquestioning instrument of that thing,
Hmm.
right? Like find a big other that you can defer to,
Exactly.
right? Right?
Exactly.
Because uh, out here in the cold, it's unbearable,
Yes.
right? Right? And so he's suggesting is faith as it has shown up in the modern world, right? Is is this thing that restores us to a kind of like unthinking certainty.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's really interesting too because Martin Luther suffered from scrupulosity. Constantly thought he was a very sinful man, and so his theology kind of reflects a lot of that. And I do wonder if it was unbearable just within the structures of the Catholic Church at the time that he had to get out because he was
Yeah.
so much in suffering and couldn't fix it. I mean, there was obviously some corruption going on at the same time, different things like that. But from a theological standpoint, to break from the infrastructures that weren't giving you peace, I find that
Yeah.
interesting. You know.
Yeah. I think it's maybe part of your point too, is we can't think that like Fromm is like giving the Catholic Church much of a pass here, right?
No.
Like he's
No. Yeah.
He's not, right? I mean, he's saying the break from the primary ties, just like, your children have to break from you, was was right. It had to happen, right? And the church was was, in his view, stunting the individuality, right, in that
Mhm.
psychoanalytic sense, right, the full development of the individual, right, to live on their own terms, right? You see that,
Yep.
and like you could like I think you could like diagnose like Luther was chafing under that weight, right?
Yes.
And then what does he do? He obliterates the whole thing, and now, oh crap, I gotta live still. What do? I just submit myself to an even greater authority, right?
Yes.
It just takes away any possibility of doubt whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because he doesn't really even offer a critique of the Catholic Church. He kinda just says, "This is what it was. This is
Yeah.
what was unifying all these people into one certain condition, but the breaking free of it was a good thing for the individual," right?
Yes.
So he's not necessarily critiquing the church as a societal institution that keeps people together, but he is
Yeah.
saying if it's keeping you from becoming an individual, then
Yeah.
yes, then you have to break.
Yeah. I think he critiques the church no more than one would critique the womb.
Yeah, there you go.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like humanity in the West had to be fostered
Yep.
in a way. And but then what eventually happens is humanity had to grow up, and the teen years are rough, right? The teen years are rough. And and one way it can go is like utterly destructive revolution,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Which it did in some
Um,
cases.
which it did in many cases, yeah. And I think, and even Fromm's Marxism recognizes that,
Mhm.
right, as bad, but at this, or as not the optimal way. But another way, and the one he's really worried about, because he's writing this 1930s, is just a falling back into an infantile authoritarianism, right? Like, and he uses this phrase, the authoritarian personality, which, like later, the Frankfurt School, and Fromm was involved with this, like produced this like massive, like 1,000-page tome on what they called the authoritarian personality. And the authoritarian personality isn't just the person who wants to be in charge; it's also the person who enjoys being dominated.
Mhm.
It's the masochist, right?
Yes.
Okay, like what, and this, I think this is what Fromm is getting at here, is modernity has created this kind of masochism in many of us, maybe all of us, a desire to just have that freedom taken from us, right? To
Mhm.
be dominated, right? And I think that's what he's saying is like, look, this is why we've got a Nazi problem now,
Yeah.
right? And I love what he's saying here in that passage, because he's saying is like anything that is going to be taken on as like this unquestioning allegiance, call it faith, whatever, right? Like really ask yourself, is is there any rational credential for this thing, or is it, even if there is a rational credential, is that why I'm aligning myself to it, or is it because it absolves me of the burden of isolation that comes with the realization of freedom,
Yeah.
right? You know what I
Absolutely.
mean? Yeah, and I think someone like Fromm could affirm the exact same primary ties,
Mhm.
right? But do it under a condition of freedom, and there would be no problem with that, right?
Yes.
But the problem though is until you've like reached that kind of maturity to do that, there's this constant temptation to fall into, just as he puts it here, becoming a blind instrument of a dominating power.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting too because he talks a little bit about I can't remember if it's in this section or a little bit later. I read the most of the other section as well, but he talks about the difference between individual responsibility of character versus a social character that you can be kind of raised into.
Yeah.
It's interesting because he makes the clear, like, as you said earlier in the conversation, that he makes it very clear that look, the human person needs a community. They need love. They need
Yeah.
acceptance of some kind. But guess what?
Meaningful work in a community. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
But now that community is going to help shape your character. So
Yes.
if that community is giving into a new authority, you might also fall into that, without
Yeah.
knowingly doing it.
Yeah. This is one of like the most like dialectical books I've ever read. Because like it's like, and think because he's doing this like Marxist historical materialism thing where like the mode of the social conditions, the mode of production, like produce a certain like type of consciousness, right? But then like that's going to feed back into those conditions, right? And so
Hmm.
like we produce we produce a kind of liberation, which then leads us, if we do it right, to do a new kind of work, right?
Yes.
a new kind of creative work. But then that's going to change the conditions now, right? Which is then gonna lead to a need for a new kind of liberation, right?
Exactly.
Which will produce a new kind of work, which then will change the conditions, and which will then like lead for a new kind of liberation. And that's why I think for Fromm, I think maybe for Jim, there has to be a constant wariness then
Yes.
of always like falling into this kind of nostalgia for the past, right?
Yep.
That is a way of getting yourself off the hook of deciding for the now, right?
Yep. Or
Right.
this kind of not a nostalgia, but a desire for a certain progressive future that you're going to get beyond something like this,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, me too.
Usually, it's
Like,
an authoritarian that's going to promise that,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And that'd be interesting when we eventually do, and now we have to do it. His book on Freud and Marx to see what he does with that. Because I would bet you he's not going with the like vulgar Marxist vision that somehow we're going to like just end the dialectics of it,
Hmm.
right? You know,
Right.
it seems to me that Fromm is much more talking about like we need to protect the individual such the individual can constantly protect herself from authoritarianism.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I
Right.
wish this is the kind of conversation about critical theory that people should be having, because it just gets crapped on by a lot of people, particularly of the right or the conservatives, that they don't understand what we're talking about when it comes to this.
Yeah.
Like this,
Fromm is not coming for your children.
right? Well, this to me is the heart of critical theory. Of like, all we're trying to do is say, look, people are trying to take your freedom away, whether it's
Yeah.
brands or whether it's a political institution or whether it's
Yeah.
somebody else, whatever it might be. So to be awake to that,
Yeah.
like that, I just don't see why that's a problem.
Dare I say, be woke to it.
Right?
Yeah. Dare I say, right? Okay. Yeah. Cause look, like, are there people who understand very well that we have needs for belonging, that we have needs for authoritarianism or authorities? They understand. Yes. And do they exploit that? Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. Right. Who? A lot of people.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Right.
On both sides of the aisle. I mean,
On
that's
all
the thing.
sides of the aisle, on all, I mean, yeah, I mean, like, and so whether it's marketing, whether it's politics, right? The people know that like what someone like Fromm is saying here is that we have these deep needs to belong to something, so we don't have to decide everything, and they will provide that for you, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
In a way that ends up dominating you, right?
Exactly.
Right. And like Fromm saying too, you know, he says like the we can go back to the primary ties innocently no more than the child can return to the womb,
That's
right?
right.
So whatever you think about some set of primary ties, you cannot claim to have the same relationship to it as someone in the 12th century did, right?
Absolutely right.
Right? Okay, because the something broke. Okay,
Yeah, those
and so
conditions
if
don't
you're gonna,
last.
yeah, if you're gonna hold those things, you got to hold them as a matter of personal responsibility now,
Yep.
right? And so, but then that also means you have to be, this is like the Hegelian moment here. You got to be self-consciously aware of what you're doing and ask yourself, why do I really hold them? Right?
Exactly.
Do I hold them because simply they get me off the hook of thinking for myself? Or do I hold them because in fact, they are what ought to be? Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I think if they, for Fromm, if we're not wary of that, we end up becoming Nazis. Right.
Yes.
Of some sort or another. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. This actually reminded me a little bit of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, the
Oh
poem.
yeah. Yeah.
When he kind of talks about like this, the thing that kept us together broke, whatever that thing
Yeah.
was, right? And so now there's still pieces that you can see around, and maybe you might be able to pick them up, but you're never putting that thing back together. Like that puzzle is broken, and you're just not going to be able to do it. And what I really like about Fromm, which we'll probably get more into in the next episode because it's more towards the end of his response to all of this, is stuff like love and character and responsibility and like leading a good life. I'm like, that's the perfect response to me. And so when it came to T.S. Eliot, then he writes his four quartets of like love is kind of the only thing that we've got left to keep us socially conditioned to thrive as individuals.
Meaningful work and significant human relations. Like boom, boom, right? That's the two piece in the soda for Fromm, man, right?
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
and
I
I
just think
just
that that's a brilliant response, and it's funny to me that he came from Frankfurt School because that was not the response of some of the people that came from Frankfurt, right? That they saw it more as we need to take over those political institutions,
yeah,
or possibly be in revolution.
like Fromm's interesting that he managed to like piss off mainstream psychoanalysis, right? And, ends up on the outside with the Frankfurt School too, eventually.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Like
I can
he's,
see why
he did,
though. See why.
yeah, you can see why, he was pretty ill behaved, right? And then like his work clearly has an influence on Deleuze-Guattari. They cite him, right? It's interesting that what you were talking about with T.S. Eliot, I think Deleuze-Guattari cite The Wasteland in Anti-Oedipus. Like
Really?
I think, yeah, I
Nice.
think they do. I'd have to look that up. I think they do. Anyway, uh, dear listener, if I'm wrong, let me know. Okay. Because that idea of like what's happened is this like capitalism came along and like deterritorialized everything, and now
Hmm.
there's like little just scraps of meaning
Hmm.
floating around, and like one temptation is that you could just grab one of those scraps and just have like a paranoid obsession with it, and I think that's what Fromm was talking about with authoritarianism,
Hmm.
right?
Totally.
Here's one scrap floating now in this like obliterated stew of meanings that are available, and just gonna grab one and hold on to that, and that's my whole lens for the world. Or for losing guitar, you can go schizophrenic, right?
Yeah.
Just
Right.
like assembling a collage. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, do you see what I mean? And I think Fromm may be doing neither of those. I don't
I
know that
think so.
he's like saying
I agree.
you just assemble a collage and it's just going to be about like creativity in this sort of like quasi Nietzschean way, liberation for its own sake, right? I think for Fromm, it it comes down to you have to find a way to do creative work that actually mixes with nature, that advances things, right?
Hmm.
That makes a social contribution, and you need to have like stable, meaningful relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to
Interesting.
me that
Friend of
he
the
does.
show, Frank Petrocelli and I are writing a paper on this right now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It does seem to me that he does come out quasi pro democracy. I mean, in a decent way,
400%.
although he is a kind of Marxist Democrat, if you will.
Yeah.
So that adds in other aspects of it, but
Yeah. I
uh,
mean,
to praise the individual to be able to actually influence its political institutions, that helps fight authoritarianism, right? So
speaking of myopic paranoia, okay, so like I think what people have to realize there are as many varieties of Marxism as there are like denominations of Christianity. You
yeah,
know what I mean? And like,
yeah,
not all Marxism is Stalinist,
that's
right?
right.
Not all Marxism is Leninist. Like keep in mind, like Trotsky had to hit the road because they wanted to kill him because he wasn't on board with like the Leninist project, right? And matter of fact, they eventually cap him. I mean, you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of infighting here, and not like anyway. I could go on about that, but like there are like people who identify Marxist who are like Fromm, who like if you look at them, really what they have in mind is something like a kind of liberatory democracy, right? You know what I mean? And yeah, they're like people identify as Marxists who are like Stalinists. Yeah, I mean, but like look, like Sartre is a Marxist. Right. Right. Okay. But there is no greater apologist for human freedom. Now, of course, he has to write a 2-volume, 1,400-page treatise trying to to square his existentialism of being and nothingness with his Marxism, right? This is
Yeah,
this is the critique of the dialectic from him, right? I mean, someday we'll work on that, right? But like, you see what I mean? I just think like Marxism now has become such a dirty word to a lot of people in the American political stew
hmm,
without understanding that there's so many varieties of it, right? There's so many
exactly,
phases of Marx's thought, right?
totally.
That or like Marx himself changes his mind and like it is more or less revolutionary at different times, things like that. You see what I mean? So like, yeah, I think we need to destigmatize the word, right? Or at least the texts, right? Because
Yeah.
there's much there's much to learn. Yeah,
Well, I think too. I mean, his critique of capitalism, saying like meaningful work needs to exist, and if your capitalist system is not doing so, guess what? Marx has a couple of ideas. Like that's, what I'm saying. And we should all want meaningful work for everybody. Like that makes
exactly.
sense
Right.
to me.
It's interesting in one of the I can't remember if it's the forward or the first chapter of this text of Fromm's text. He talks about how there is going to be it's the second forward, okay?
Okay.
Because he says to the 1966 version, because he says, with the rise of automation and cybernetics, this text is all the more important because the worker is going to be replaced by machines, and then thereby to be all the more alienated from anything like meaningful work, which will ruin their relationships with each other, and then thereby throw them into the arms of authoritarianism. Right. I mean, what could be more pertinent to our
That is
current
crazy.
situation? Right. Like, yeah, it's in there. Yeah. Right. Right. Like, what could be more pertinent in our situation, where we, like tech bro billionaires, like deeply influencing a pretty, at least authoritarian signaling. I'm not saying they're
Yeah.
just signaling, right? Regime, right? At a time we are facing massive overhaul of the conditions of work in this country for the working class,
Yes.
right? Is
Crazy.
there a risk of authoritarian allegiance in the worst sense here? Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, even, I mean, AI itself could become authoritarian, right? I mean, you start to
Yeah.
let it make your decisions for you. That's
Yeah. I mean, I
ultimately,
wrote, I have that piece in my Substack where I talk about like AI as
yeah.
repressive fantasy,
Yep.
right? And what is it? It's like it becomes this explicit big other I can defer to for everything. I don't have to decide my life. I can just go to chat and it will tell me, right? You know what I mean? It absolves me of the discontent of subjectivity, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Does your thinking for you.
does your thinking for you, right? Um, and then and think of it like as you have now, like a completely maybe massive loss of meaningful work for a generation of people, uh, which will then, as always does, will ruin human relationships. Like Marx got that much right. Like the
Hmm.
conditions of work do carry over to our social lives, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It will ruin human relations, and then you have this like ubiquitous big other that will give you the answers to all your questions, that will like act as your counselor, that will act as your lover, right? All these things. Like the occasion for authoritarian domination here is like nothing that we've ever seen. Right. And this doesn't even require like dystopian like sci-fi stuff. Like this is
Right.
like all there right now.
Exactly.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I always think of meet the new boss, same as the old, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly. 100%. Right. If I were ever to get a tattoo, there it is.
there it
That
is.
would be that would be it. Like right, one of the like around the collarbone.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Nice.
That would be it. Yeah, and so I think you can see, like we'll get into his actual critique of Nazism, right?
Mhm.
I'm predicting next time that that is going to get a little close to home, right?
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's going to get a
Well,
little,
it's called The Psychology of Nazism, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's another. This is one maybe we'll do like a series on the psychology of Nazism. It's another great text by a guy named William Reich, like one of the great madmen of the 20th century. He wrote a book called The Psychoanalysis of Fascism, I think it is.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he says like the greatest problem that he thinks like facing psychoanalysis is to explain why is it the German people voted oppression on themselves.
Yeah.
Like
Interesting.
like for a moment, leave aside the Jews and the Russians. Like no one else paid for that war, like the German
Right.
people did, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they voted it in themselves. Why did they do it? And he wants to say there was this kind of insecurity in the German middle class, right? There were certain the authoritarian personalities up and running, and they voted oppression on themselves, right?
Yeah.
To solve the insecurity issue, right?
Yep.
I think Fromm is saying something very similar, and they're both saying it in real time. They're both in German speaking world. It's happening. Yeah.
Wow.
And now where are we now? Is the American lower middle class at a moment of like unprecedented insecurity? Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Right?
Yes, it is.
Is there a chance of us voting oppression on ourselves? Yes, there is. Yeah. Right. Or like all sorts of things, like voting oppression ourselves, going in for consumer identities, whatever. Right? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Good episode, man.
Good one, man. Yeah. So let's
And that
go.
was only half of Fromm's book, so
Like I think the good half is coming.
I think so too.
Yeah. Like we actually gonna actually start talking Nazis.
Exactly.
All right, let's go. Yeah. Great.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, hey, as
Cool.
always, man, I really love doing this with you, man. So
Thank
uh if the good people out of their own free will could like and subscribe,
Yep.
right, repost, we appreciate that. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're always with the approach to the holidays, please don't be afraid to help out Jared's own Toys for Tot drive here by becoming a part of the Patreon network for the Legion. Yeah, this is
Absolutely.
my favorite joke of the day right there.
Nice.
Cool, man.
Mm.
All right, so until next week, maybe next Sunday.
Yeah, that could work. All
Cool.
right, man. Appreciate it.
All right, man.